the test of emergency alerts.
And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Yes, I happen to have the national alarm thing going off on my phone just as we start. How good is that timing? Huh? Yes. I was hoping it would go off 1 or 2 minutes before I actually started. Terrible timing. Anyway, yes, welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 150. Today we're going to be talking about the ground level challenge and looking at the submissions that are being put in. Yeah, stick around. I don't know, 150 episodes in and still I get caught out by technology and everything that's going on. So yes, where are we? Today we are talking about the ground level challenge that I set last week, the photo challenge. So yes, this is Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you are here to improve your understanding of photography, then you're in the right place. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you click like, click the notification bell, tell your friends, buy me a coffee, all these different things you can do to help support these podcasts. But first off, leave me a comment. Let me know you're here. Say hello. Tell me where you are. Tell me what the weather's like. I can see we've got a couple of comments in here already. What have we got? Oh, April says, hello everyone from a rainy morning in Long Island, New York. Nadia says, hi everyone from an overcast Fife. Maggie says, hello from Castle Douglas, and the swallows are here. Yes, we did indeed see swallows this morning, which is rather lovely. Rosemary says, good morning everybody, we're overcast here too. Marilyn says, hello from snowy Colorado. Snowy in Colorado, eh? Wonderful. Congrats on 150 episodes. Thank you, Marilyn, much appreciated. Janet says, hello from Mississauga. It's sunny in Canada at the moment, well, that part of Canada anyway. Sandra says, hi from a cloudy Birmingham. And Nicola says, hi from just along the road. Yeah, Nicola's not too far away either, which is rather lovely. So, yes, today there's been that alarm going off just as I was starting there. There's been this national test of, I think it's for some kind of emergency checkout thing. So at 3 p.m, all the alarms were supposed to go off on mobile phones. Or you had to kind of in advance make sure you switched off your mobile phone. Even though I've got this on silent, it still got through. So you have to have it either on airplane mode or actually switched off, or you have to go into your settings and say, no, I'm not wanting emergency alerts, thank you very much. Anyway, I didn't do any of that because I thought it was going to go off at exactly 3, which would have been during the countdown. Instead it went off right at the end of the countdown. Okay, so that's me thoroughly kind of thrown out and slightly off kilter here. Where are we? John's joined us, says hello from Columbus, Ohio, back after a short break. And Susan's joined us from an almost sunny Kakubri. Almost sunny, yeah. Hints of sunshine here today. There's been moments of breakthrough, this is true. Right, so, yes. Last week I set the ground level photography challenge. So the idea being that instead of sort of pointing your camera down towards the ground, was that you actually got down to ground level and pointed your camera sort of along and to sort of see what you could get. And it changes your perspective. I think it's one of those really interesting kinds of photography. So often when we start doing our photography, we start from shooting everything at our natural eye level. It's kind of what we do, it's how we see the world. We're standing there, we take a photo. And you can often tell a sort of amateur level or beginner level photography where, say, people are photographing their pets or they're photographing their children, they're always looking down on them. But it can even happen with experienced photographers. There's a friend of mine who's a landscape photographer and does the most amazing landscapes imaginable. But I did notice for a long time that every time he photographed people, he was always looking, the thing is, he's quite tall. And he always seemed to be sort of looking downwards. He was never down at the level people actually were. And I thought, well, as a landscape photographer, it didn't really matter. As long as you could kind of see over the hedge, you were fine. So this thing that we just sort of get into a mindset of just photographing from the angle we're at, getting used to the idea of changing your height can have quite a dramatic impact on your photograph and the way you start seeing the world and integrating, well, not integrating, that's the wrong word. Anyway, the way you start doing your photography, the way you start seeing it. So I felt it was certainly a challenge worth joining in, and I'm delighted to say I think it's about 19 people have all joined in and sent the photos. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look through the images and hopefully become a little bit inspired by the different approaches people have taken. I see we've got a couple more. Oh, Meg's joined us and said hello everyone, and Stacey says good morning after some major rainstorms last night and beautiful weather during the day. It's cooler here in Hatboro, that's Pennsylvania, but sunny, going to be in the mid-60 range today. Excellent. Oh, April says mid-60s, perfect spring weather. Right, okay, so where are we going to start then? Right, what I'm going to do, he's going to miss it. I'm sure he will tune in soon, but he will just have to go back to the beginning. I'm going to start with Robert. So Robert from Texas, although he's currently in California, took this photo, and I thought this was quite a good one to start with, because if in terms of ground level, yeah, you are absolutely at ground level, and that notion of the road is a great device for giving that sense of really taking you into the photo, because we know what a road is, we know roughly how wide, or in this case the road is 2 cars wide, and we can see it disappearing, and so those lovely perspective lines give us that sense of depth moving into it. Now I will say, Robert, there's a little bit with this one, I just want to, you know what I'm like about horizons. I think you just need to, even if this road is slightly tilted, and I'm not totally sure that it is, there is a bit of me that just wants to straighten. If you were to go anti-clockwise 1 degree, just a single degree, I could breathe easy on this one. Still, having said that, I think it's a fun kind of start to the photo. Robert sent me the high resolution one, which means you can actually start zooming in and zooming in and zooming in. And you can even see that this is actually a mountain range on the distance. That is one of the slight problems that you do have with when you write down, is that quite often anything that's big in the far distance just seems very small. You're not really noticing the mountain range until you zoom right in. But Robert says this is a photo that I took in the Mojave Desert last year. I did very little editing. It was a bit of a challenge to get the shot because of the cars. You can see them in the far background of the photo. So, yep, here we go. You can see cars coming in. He says they were going close to 100 miles an hour. So they're on you instantly. I do think it turned out well to do the perspective in the golden hour, though. And so, yeah, certainly if you've got cars shooting at you 100 miles an hour, I can imagine you don't want to be sitting in the middle of the road for long. So, what have we got here? So, but there's a nice light, that kind of cool blue in there, that very gradated horizon, the yellow here of the line in the middle, and that sort of soft golden feel to the grasses. I think it's a fun photo, and it's a good one to open up something like this. So, smug points to you there. Robert, thank you for sending that one in. A couple of comments here. Rosemary says, Robert, this really captures the feeling of loneliness. Wonderful. April says, great depth of field. Nicola says, lovely road shot. Envious of the pothole-free road surface. This is true. At the moment in Dumfries and Galloway, this little corner of Scotland, it feels like the potholes are just getting worse and worse and worse. It's, quite scary. There are certain roads where you're almost down to crawling pace, weaving in and out. Sandra says great lighting. Okay, so let's move on. So next one I'm going to show is Alex. And Alex sent in this one and said, due to my extreme age, being overweight and finding it difficult getting up from a prone position, ground level is a rarity. However, when I saw this spider walking on water with what looked like a jewel on its back, there was no choice but to lie down. Fortunately, there was a handy bench with which to haul myself back upright. This is a very heavy crop, as the subject was very small and well into the centre of the pond. Well, I think you did pretty well. If that was kind of well into the centre of the pond, and I think you did pretty well to spot it, to be honest. It really is quite incredible. I'm not entirely. Is that like a sack of eggs, or I'm not entirely sure what that is. Not quite enough detail to really work out what it is. But we can see the spider here with that eggs coming down. It is carrying whatever it is it's carrying. Perhaps it's a sack of eggs. Perhaps it's something else. Or maybe those who are kind of well into their insects will know. If you do know, do leave a comment. Put it down below, enlighten the rest of us. But yeah, a really fascinating thing to see there, Alex. So well spotted that, and I suppose extra smug points for risking life and limb for climbing down. I'm never entirely sure whether you might get back up again. There was another comment on this, I think Roy from Yorkshire earlier in the week stuck an image in, but at that point he was pointing it downwards, and I'd said, well, you kind of need to get down to ground level, and he mentioned his back problems. So yeah, it is kind of a tricky one. What I would say though, and I offered this up to Roy as a suggestion, is even if getting down to actual ground level is a bit dodgy because you might not be able to get up again, I would consider things like a wall or certain surfaces or a bench or something which is already raised but still flat. If there's a mound, that you can kind of get up to, but certainly a wall, like a garden wall or a civic wall or something which is sort of maybe more kind of waist height or armpit height or something. A fence maybe. Place your camera on that and then look along the length of it, and I think you can quite often get some interesting things. Certainly get a cat walking along it, or you get flowers, or you get insects, or again there's an interesting, it's essentially a kind of ground level like shot but on top of a surface. So do consider that as another option as well. But yeah, smoke points to you for getting down and seeing that and managing to get back up again, Alex. What do you got? Robert says, howdy all from Texas. Welcome, Robert. You've just missed... I opened this with your picture, so you're a bit late, so I'm afraid you'll have to pause this and go right back to the beginning. When we get to the end of... No, don't pause it now. When we get to the end, just make sure you start again and you can see your picture. However, you can probably scroll back and see some nice comments that other people have written about it. April says, such a great catch. Sandra says, great macro. Robert says, excellent shot, Alex. Rosemary says, that's an amazing spider, Alex. Kudos to you for getting down to the ground. Meg says, I really like the reflection of the spider in the water. Nadia says, it looks like the legs of baby spiders as you zoom in. Quite possibly. Rosemary says, how very cool to have the reflection. Creates a blue highlight that separates the spider from the green water. And Stacey says, looks like egg sacs. Good job capturing a rarity. Glad you got back on your feet. Excellent. Now, next one I'm going to go on to is Rosemary. And Rosemary sent in this one, and she said, Monday gave us the first break in drizzle that we've had in ages, so I set outdoors with my phone and DSLR. I tried to use my phone but couldn't see the screen well at all, mainly because of the angle. And I do have to say, it does tend to sometimes be that I notice that with the screen, because if you are kind of, I've talked about putting the phone down on the ground even if you can't get to it, but then yes, there is a kind of a bit of a problem seeing it. It does feel a little bit more slightly hit or miss. There's a bit more guesswork involved, less being absolutely certain you're hitting what you're hitting. If you can see a vague outline, you might be able to sort of focus on where you... The great thing about these phones is you can kind of press on the screen where you want to focus, and most of the time it will get there. But on something like this, when you're right down in amongst, you've got the grasses, you've got the moss, you've got the mushrooms, trying to get it exactly where you want is going to be particularly difficult. However, so she said, lying on the ground would have improved my view, but it was just too muddy, gloopy, I was being a wimp. I don't think there's anything about being a wimp. You don't want an earful of wet moss. You can kind of understand. Instead, I used my DSLR with a flip-up screen. Excellent thing. We were talking about that last week, which some of the DSLRs have a flip-up screen, so you can put it down at ground level, turn the screen up, and then you can look straight down at it. And she says, instead of and a 105mm macro lens, I haven't practiced with much. Its autofocus is really searchy, for lack of a better term. Okay, so that means that it's kind of struggling to know where it's supposed to latch on to. Maybe you could, or another member has a suggestion for this. Yes, the lens can be set to manual focus, but because I've never used manual focus with live view, I just left it on autofocus. Well, yeah, actually, if you've got the camera sitting on the ground and it's relatively steady, do play around with the idea of the live view, because I think then, and also if you've got one of these where you do have the flip out screen, if it's a touch screen, a bit like your phone, you can also use it for finding the focal point that you want as well by touching the screen. Might depend on the camera that you've got. So I think it's worth exploring. Where are we? So what were you saying there? Yes. So that's that problem of the autofocus might Now again, depending on your macro, I know with my macro lens, I've got a couple of different settings. There's a kind of a setting where it will autofocus the full range from 30 centimeters or whatever through to infinity, but you can also do the kind of, or you can limit it to that it maybe only goes from its first focal point to 10 centimeters or 10 centimeters to 30 centimeters. So you can give it a range as to where it's going to search, and then that way at least, you know, if you're trying to get something really close up, you're not it's not auto-focusing on something that's several yards away. So look for those kind of settings on your thing as well. So anyway, as a result, my focus on this image is pretty soft, which is disappointing. It might have worked better to choose a slightly deeper depth of field to get the entire mushroom in sharper focus, narrowing the aperture and raising the ISO. I do like the way your eye spirals from around the right from the foreground to the outer mushrooms to the one in the centre. Yes, I mean, in terms of your composition, there's a nice, as you say, they sort of the mushrooms curve around here and draw your eye up to this one, which is rather nice. Now, taking a quick look at your stats on this, your aperture is 3.5. Now, that's a very wide aperture, which gives you a very narrow depth of field. And part of the problem that you've got here, I think, Rosemary, is the fact that it is too narrow. When you've got a macro lens, a lot of these macro lenses, it's already at over 100 millimeters thing. And what it does is that narrows it even more. So your actual depth of field is really tiny. And very often with a macro lens, you kind of do need to be sort of, your starting point is a, an f7 or an f9 or something to really get what you want. And in this case, where it looks, what's happened is we can see the front tip of the mushroom is in focus, but then it goes out of focus almost immediately. And then because the stalk is out of focus, the sharp bit is only this little bit here, and it doesn't feel like quite enough. You really wanted a bit more of that in focus, or maybe you wanted to go for the stalk. But it's a tricky one to try and get the bit you want. It's overhanging. You've got other sharp bits here which are on the same plane, but they're not around. All around here is out of focus, but also because the stem is out of focus and the grass below it is out of focus until you get sort of a bit further forward, it just does feel a little bit kind of hanging in the middle of nowhere. I think it's a nice composition, but I think, yes, definitely try and go for a deeper depth of field. But if this is sitting on the ground and essentially not likely to move, then you can go for a narrower depth of focus, but you can also slow your shutter speed down, so you don't necessarily end up having to have a really high ISO. Just slow your shutter speed right down, and if necessary, put it on a 2-second timer so that you're not having to worry about camera wobble when you press the shutter. So, hope that gives you a few ideas. But smug points to you there, Rosemary. Thanks very much for sending that in. And yes, you're right. I do like the way those kind of mushrooms curve round to the left, round to the right there as well. Sandra says, I think this is lovely with a bouquet background. April says, the mushroom looks like a straw umbrella at the beach. Neat looking. Stacey says, I love this. Reminds me of a storybook as if a little fairyland. Delicate scene and good macro. Rosemary says, thanks. There is a focal range limiter on my lens, which I've never played with. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's get out and play with these things, and sooner or later there's more tools in the toolbox for how to fix a problem. Sandra says, I have the same problem with my macro lens. Peter's joined us and says, nice. And Rosemary says, excellent tips, Kim. Thank you very much. Cool. Right, so next up then, I'm going to go to April. So April got down with the dandelions and says, I took this picture last week during my Easter vacation. I just got back from a trip and was too tired to go anywhere since I share the same syndrome as Kim. And I did not want to waste a beautiful day that was in the high 70s. I decided to sit in my yard and take pictures of dandelions. Just a quick point for anybody who's saying, what syndrome's that? I do suffer from CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. You might not realise it when I'm on these podcasts. I seem very full of energy and up, and I've usually just had quite a strong coffee. Basically, chronic fatigue syndrome is it's a condition where you are tired much more of the time than you should be, but there's no clear medical explanation for it. They've checked your blood levels, they've checked your iron levels, they've checked this, they've checked that, they've checked all the other things, and nothing's showing up. Eventually, they kind of give up looking for things and give you a label called chronic fatigue. So chronic fatigue syndrome, also, or quite often known as ME, there's a debate there whether some people who have ME think they have something other than chronic fatigue, but ME/CFS, or chronic fatigue, is the way that it's usually put together. So I do happen to suffer from that, and April does too, so that's what she's referring to there. What it does mean is that you kind of have to watch your energy levels somewhat. So anyway, that's a little aside. April says she was too tired to go anywhere, having been out on a trip, so but didn't want to waste the day and decided to sit in a yard and take pictures of dandelions, which is a great thing. And I think it is that fun thing about ground level is that even something in your garden, even on your doorstep, can suddenly transform into a different world. And I think this is fun. You know, it's a nice bright yellow, and it's that bit that we were talking about last week. The great thing with the phone is you can get right down low. You can stick it right down on ground level, and you can be actually under the dandelion. We're seeing from beneath it. So fun one there, April. Thanks for sending that in, and so smug points to you for that one. Rosemary says, wonderful depth of field, April. The contrast of the sharp dandelion against the blowy background is great. I like this a lot. Okay, so next on I want to move on to Cliff. So Cliff sent in this one, which says, hi Kim, I don't usually like portraits from unconventional angles, but while visiting a castle in Spain last year, I wanted to capture the detail in the floor while photographing my wife Tina. Bizarrely, I feel this extreme angle still works. So yeah, that's a kind of fun idea there, Cliff. I think is you know, I mean, again, we're used to photographing people from head height, but here you've got quite interested in the texture of the ground. And yeah, all these kind of cobbles, the bricks, there's an awful lot of texture around here. Somebody sitting in the background here. I mean, of course, there's always that problem when you're out and about, that there's other people get in the way. And I think, you know, bloke sitting down there, a couple of guys walking off there. But you got your wife there, and it makes for a more interesting photo, I think. Or not necessarily, it's a different kind of photo. You know, that. Yeah, I mean, one of those things with portraits, again, it's worth playing around with the angles, worth playing around from, you know, different forms at levels of height, and it gives you a different feel. So what you've got is, you've got ground, you've got this cobbly stone ground, but on its own is just a kind of texture. With somebody standing on it, gives it much more of a context. So, fun kind of exploration there, Cliff. Smug points to you for that one. Thanks for sending that in. Viji's arrived. Says, good evening, everyone. Sorry for being late. My husband's birthday and went out for dinner. Back now. Of course it is. Happy birthday to Suresh there, Viji. And of course, yeah, well, if you need to rush off, fully understand. On a day like your husband's birthday, he takes priority over these podcasts. But do say happy birthday to him for us. Sandra says really good close to the ground shot and interesting angle to photograph a person. I think it works well. Rosemary says, I'm glad this is your wife, Cliff, and not some random tourist. And she goes on to say, random tourists would think you'd abandoned your senses getting down like that. April says, great idea for a portrait shot, and happy birthday to your husband, Viji. Right, okay, let's move on to Janet. So, where are we? Now, Janet sent us this one. I got a splash getting really captured quite sharply. I go sort of the waves crashing, but it's right down at beach level. You know, this which is fun. Always a bit dodgy depending on whether the tide's coming in. Looks like there's a kind of small wave in the background there, just over in the. You know, but yes, you've managed to. There are different ways of playing with your shutter speed with waves. If you go for a slow shutter speed, it's all going to become very blurry and very milky. What you've done with this one, I think it's 1,000th of a second, and it's managed to absolutely freeze all these little bubbles and bits of foam and water Right. Yeah, and in fact, actually, there's places here where it looks distinctly like kind of a warped glass, which is quite a fun texture. Janet says, I have a couple of ideas to try for the challenge, but it didn't look like I was going to be able to get them done before Sunday. So this is an old image from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. I do remember having to get the camera out of the way just after hitting the shutter, as this wave was larger than the other waves that day. I think we've all got caught out with that one, where you're sort of down taking a photo of a wave and then suddenly you realise it's getting very close very quickly, and suddenly sort of trying to run backwards up the beach. Never quite so easy when you've already squatted down. This image came to mind because I was looking through beach photos in preparation for an upcoming trip to New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island on the east of Canada. Yeah, beautiful part of the country, the Atlantic coast of Canada. But yeah, no, I mean, that's fun. I think this is the only one we've got of the sea, but it is another one worth remembering for everyone. If you're going down to the beach, beaches are kind of a fun place to get things like seaweed, things like rocks, shells, sand castles even, right down at ground level, all take on a completely different appearance than if you're standing above them looking down. And certainly waves suddenly splashing up. If you can get down, obviously trying to make sure that your camera doesn't get soaked in the process, then that's a great thing. So thanks for sending that one in, Janet. Smug points to you there for risking your camera and yourself from getting just a bit too wet. So where are we? Sandra says, nice in focus shot. Well done for getting so close to the wave coming in. Nurije says, hi everyone. Sorry I'm late. I'm glad you could make it along, Nurije. We've not looked at your photo yet, so you're still in time for that one. Janet says, it was too bright and sunny for a slow shutter, especially since I did not have an ND filter at the time. Well, that's it. And that's about adjusting to the conditions you're in. If it had been a dull, overcast day, maybe you might have gone for a slower shutter speed kind of feel. You've got a bright sunny day, so play with a high shutter speed and really try and capture those water droplets. April says, love this water ground shot. And Rosemary says, nice one, Janet, very brave. Nova Scotia. Well, Nova Scotia's cold in the winter, but it's not in the summer. I spent a year in Nova Scotia when I was a student. I had a student exchange from Dundee over to Nova Scotia, and in the summer, in late May, just before I came back, I remember it being 30 degrees Celsius, so which is warmer than Scotland ever gets. So it doesn't necessarily have to be cold. Certainly it was minus 30 during the winter, so cold in the winter, not necessarily so cold in the summer. Viji says sharp and crisp, and Janet says, well, it was actually chilly because it was October. Okay, fair enough. Right, next up then, I want to move on to Jacqui. So Jacqui sent us this photo and said, this is my entry for the ground level photography challenge. This shot was actually taken a while back when entering a competition for shoes. Going down to ground level for one of the entries I thought would give the concept of shoes another meaning and perspective to the viewers. These were actually an old pair of boots belonging to my daughter that I photographed on an abandoned railway track in Franschhoek. I'll go with that. You can correct me later on the pronunciation. In the Cape, South Africa. I felt the tracks provided perfect leading lines while the clouds made for a moodier appeal. Yeah, now this is a fun one, Jacqui, I think. Okay, so you're kind of using the tracks for that perspective, a bit like Robert's road lines earlier, although the boots are blocking that. But it does give us sort of layers and that kind of overcast cloudiness. We've got the texture of the rusty railway, and the lovely texture of the kind of leathery boots and laces, as well as the texture of the wooden sleepers as well. And also, I mean, unlike Robert, who had to leap out of the way of the cars, fortunately you've not had to leap out of the way of trains to get this shot. Yeah, lots of texture in that. I think it does give us that idea, again, of ground level, of where you can... I mean, obviously don't ever go and do this on a live railway track, unless you are very, very sure that there are no trains due for another hour. But yeah, I think that notion of a track, of a path, of something, always kind of gives us sort of certain lines and shape, and has a different feel when you're actually down at ground level rather than when you're at normal head height. So yeah, smug points there. Thanks for sending that one in, Jacqui. Oh, sorry, not that one. Where am I doing? That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah. Meg says, oh, really lovely photo, Janet. Susan says, wow, I love this. April says, I remember this photo and loved it. Creative. Sandra says, great pair of worn out boots. Stacey says, lovely old shoes, very wabby sabby. And Nadia says, lovely picture. Rosemary says, Jacqui, this is such a great shot. So many fascinating textures. Amazing how much colour you were able to get into a seemingly monochrome shot. Yeah, I can see to a certain extent the editing levels that where you've sort of really had to kind of draw out some of more of the textures. But that was nicely done. So, okay, next up then, we're going to go to John. So John sent us this one and said, as low as I could get. Well, if you're going to be underneath the mushroom, then that is pretty low. That's and lovely texture here in the gills and in the stem. But what I have noticed is you've changed the background. This isn't the natural background that's come with it. Couple of giveaways. One, it does look like it's kind of been cut out slightly, and if we look down the edging here, we can see that you haven't quite lined up the line. So we've got bits of what look like grass, little bits of green in the background here, which didn't quite line up with that. The other giveaway here, John, which is worth remembering for your editing, is if we look at noise levels here, the noise levels on the mushroom are not the same as the noise levels on the back, which is always a little bit of a giveaway if you're doing if you're doing some kind of composite. If you're trying to get a composite where it looks as natural as you can, you've got to make sure that each of the elements of it match up to the other elements. So the fact that the background doesn't have the same amount of noise as the foreground is a little bit of a giveaway. The other thing is that the focus, I think, isn't quite there as well. This is that your depth of focus here doesn't quite match up with how the texture on the wall would be either. But I mean, I'm assuming that your background just sort of felt fairly uninteresting and uninspiring. What you were trying to do was draw the attention to the mushroom. Another option for this, which you will have sometimes seen, is if this happened to be handy and you're in your back garden, is to take a piece of card. Certainly a piece of black card or something like that, a dark card, and put it behind the mushroom, and then essentially just use that as a kind of black, you then have a black cut-off background, and then that will allow all the textures and the outline of your mushroom. You will have seen people do this with flowers quite. In fact, I think we even talked about it briefly, or somebody asked me a question on this fairly recently, about that notion of doing flower photography, that sometimes if you place a piece of A4, if you've got A3, better, A2 even nicer, but certainly a piece of black card worth investing in. Just slot it behind the flower or the mushroom or whatever, and then you can take the photo without any worry about the distractions. And certainly in this case, you don't then have to worry about the awkwardness of trying to cut it out against the busy background, putting in a different background, and then trying to match up all the other things to go with it. But yeah, I mean, great to see all the gills underneath there and the texture as well. So thanks for sending that one in, and smug points to you there to John. What have we got here? April says, I enjoy your background. Sandra says, great point of view from the mushroom. And Rosemary says, John, lovely detail on the mushroom and wonderful perspective. Rosemary goes on to say, question, Kim, would a plain card allow you to impose a texture on the background in Photoshop? Well, yes. I mean, always, if you've got a plain background, then and if the background, like all these things, if the background is separate enough from the outline, so then it makes the clearer the boundary between your subject and the background, the easier it is to change or add things to the background, because you can cut out your subject more easily. So yes, you can, if you've got a plain card background and you've got a texture you would like to add, you can add the texture in. Just always make sure that, like I say, when you are adding a texture in, to make sure that if it's sitting far further back, that it would be as out of it matches up what the natural outer focus levels would be for how far it's sitting back. So keep that one in mind. So you might put a pattern on it, but remember, I mean, so for example, if you've got the mushroom and it's mostly in focus around the middle, but it starts to go out of focus at the back, behind at the back of the mushroom or the flower, you wouldn't then have a sharp background. The background would be even more out of focus than the back of whatever your subject is. So always keep that in mind. So you might add the texture and then need to blur it. But also, having blurred the background, you've got to make sure, depending on your ISO level settings for your subject, you might need to actually add in a bit of noise to match the noise levels or the ISO levels of the subject as well, if you want to make it look convincing. Hope that makes sense. Right, okay, let's move on. Graham. Now, Graham decided to play around and go... he said, I thought I would flip the remit. Instead of looking down to ground level, I decided to look up from ground level. It's a low resolution image on my phone, but an obliging bee passed just at the right time. And actually, if you look up here in the left, we've got the bee flying over as well. Would have been nicer if the bee had been lower and taking up a larger space, I think. Very powerful colours, that one. I mean, that's an interesting one. Now, strictly speaking, Graham, it was, I mean, I already kind of had a conversation with Roy earlier this week in the Facebook group to say about the fact the idea with this ground level challenge was to be sort of looking along the ground level rather than down at, and turning around and looking up from ground level kind of is slightly off topic, but it's okay. I'll let you off this time. But it opens up this idea for anybody else who's watching. I think there's a whole other genre of looking up, and this is one of those. But to take that idea of using your phone again, which can get down really low, you can get lower than your DSLR, because if you put your DSLR in the back, you've got the thickness of the camera plus the length of the lens before you know, so anything, you're going to be above grass level in a lot of times unless you haven't mown it. Whereas your phone, because it's so much thinner, can get right down underneath the flowers, underneath the grass level, under the stalks. So it is an interesting one there. And in this case, where you've got a beautiful, strong blue sky creating this, and then means that the yellow, the colours here of the flowers just really stand out and are really punchy. So a fantastic kind of colour palette on this one, Graham. And of course, if you want to hang around long enough for a bee to come floating over and you can get quick enough, click it. The part of the trickiness here is to make sure you don't also get your finger in the way when you're pressing the shutter on your phone as well. But yeah, brilliant colours, and even though you are slightly off topic, I'll still give you the smug points for that one, Graham. All right. Where are we? April says, Rosemary says, useful tip about adding background to match the original setting. Thanks. April says, nice yellow against the blue. Great looking up contest photo. Sandra says, lovely bright contrast between the flowers and the sky. And Peter says, nice contrast of colours. Right. Okay. So next up then, I'm going to go to Nicola. So Nicola sent us in this one. It says, hi Kim, it's been too long since I last joined in on a challenge, and when I saw this one I just couldn't let it go. Well, I'm delighted you decided to join in. Says, this phone photo is rather special to me as it contains all 4 of my first ever flock of hens. So I was just kind of need to dive in here. We've got this one at the front here, we've got one behind, and we've got a couple up here as well. So yep, we've got the 4 hens. Says, chickens are notoriously difficult to photograph at their low level. Often their inquisitive nature means that more often than not, most attempts mean it's a peck on the lens, and that's that. Yeah, sit down in front of the chickens, pull your phone out, and they'll just come up and peck your lens. So not easy to get a kind of a sitting down photo of one of your hens. However, this lot were fed and watered, and I struck it lucky. So there you go. Tip if you're trying to photograph the hens, feed and water them first. Sadly, this winter took its toll on 3 out of 4 of the girls. But when I look at this photo, it just makes me smile and brings back warm and wonderful memories of my original girls. I'm sorry to hear you lost three of the hens there, but really, it's really good that you've got the photo, and the photo can still put a smile on your face. I think it's one of those things I often talk about with people with photography, how very often photography, the value of the photo increases over time, almost exponentially over time. Because if I take your photo now, I could take your photo again in 5 minutes and it's not going to be really any different. But a week from now, things might have changed. A year from now, things could have changed quite a bit. 10 years from now, things could have changed considerably. So the value of the photo that we've taken increases over time. And very often we don't realise just how valuable a photo is until weeks, months, years, possibly decades later. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Though there's a whole kind of philosophy to go off on that, and there's also a whole pricing issue if you are selling photos as well, which you sometimes have to convince people of. Anyway, okay, let's move on. So next one, I'm going to move on to actually just one sec before I move on. So comments. So yeah, April says, I love this one. The chicken is adorable. Stacey says, chickens are fun. I love it. Maggie says, beautiful hen. Sandra says, great photo. Lovely hen sitting on the ground. Peter Wilson says, great photo. Rosemary says, Nicola, I'm amazed you're able to get your chickens to hold still for this. So sorry to hear about the loss of 3 of the hens. A fun photo, especially the way the table legs frame the main subject. Viji says, oh, this photo's so cute. Love the hen posing as well. And Nicola says, thank you to everyone for your lovely comments. Excellent. Right, so where was I going now? Let's move on then. So this one from Margaret Mawini, put this one in late last night. Said, can I please submit this one for the ground level photography? So getting in just before midnight. I mean, I do say try and get them in by Friday, ideally Saturday at the latest. So we just managed to squeeze it on Saturday. So it was the colours of the flowers that drew me to take it. I think the blue flowers are grape hyacinth, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not very good with flower names. Well, I'm no good with flower names. Maggie, you happen to know, you know flowers better than I do. Are these grape hyacinth? Or anybody else actually who happens to be watching who's maybe a slightly more keen gardener than I am. Yeah, it's a fun one, Margaret. I think, absolutely these kind of colours grab you. And I think, again, this kind of, it's nice getting down to the ground level. I think that's what works with this kind of photo. We've got this lovely kind of colour of this sort of yellowy green moss in the foreground. We've got the stems and stalks. I love this little bush here as well. Lots of texture within that. And that little splash of purple. So quite a fun colour palette with that one. So yeah, thanks for sending that one in, Margaret. Smug points to you there as well. Did I give you smug points, Nicola, for your hen? I hope I did. What have we got here? So, oh yeah, April says this. They are grape hyacinth. Susan says they're called muscari. Mick says spectacular photo, and I really lovely colour of the lovely yellow of the flowers of the blue sky. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so Meg's still been typing in from Graham's picture. Sandra says, I like the blue flowers with the moss in the foreground. Maggie says, yes, grape hyacinth or muscadine. And then corrects herself, muscari. John says, I like this one of the hyacinths. Cool. Right, okay. So, about halfway through, just a wee reminder here that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is certainly one of the ways you can do it. And don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like this video as well. And of course, invite your friends along. If you're enjoying these podcasts, I'm sure you know other photographers who might as well. Right, okay, so let's move on. Next up then, I'm going to go to Meg. So Meg was out this week and sent in this one and says, hi Dad, on Wednesday this week I took this photo of pine cones and twigs near the fence outside in the garden. They have a really lovely texture to them and really interesting shapes. This is a fun one, Meg. I think it really is. We have a tree next door, pine tree, which is constantly dropping cones into our garden. There's also we've got a sort of a bit of a little kind of edging up against the fence where whenever I'm tend to I walk. If I find the pine cones, I pick them up and I lob them over by the side of the fence so that they're not hitting the lawnmower when I go over the grass. And after a while, they tend to build up. Sometimes we kind of pick them up and we actually use them as kindling in the fireplace as well. But yeah, that little area kind of builds up quite nicely. And so Meg's gone out with her phone, got down low, and managed to catch. There's lots. I think there's some really lovely textures in this, Meg. And it is definitely it's a ground level photo. And this is kind of what I mean. There isn't another. If you weren't actually right down at ground level, you would just never get a photo like this. And it's part of what I'm talking about with where I think the ground level photography is always worth exploring. I'm hoping for those of you who've been taken photos and submitted here, this won't be the last time. This is kind of encouraging you to go out and take more. And those of you who've never really got round to doing any ground level photography, then again, hopefully some of these ideas are encouraging you. And certainly I think there's a lot of fun and texture to be had in this. So, smug points to you there, Meg. Lovely photo. Sandra says, great texture in the cones and twigs. Rosemary says, wonderful textures, Meg, nicely done. April says, I can smell this picture. Yeah, I know what you mean, actually. There is that kind of woody kind of rotting wood with a dry smell to it. Nicola says, great textures, Meg, so rich and varied. Peter says, nice mix of textures. Cheryl says, lovely textures, Meg. And Stacey says, good ground level, pine cones, plenty everywhere. Now, pine cones are always good for slightly distracted. Yeah, pine cones are always good for texture. Now, what am I doing here? I've suddenly realised something's not quite where I thought it was. Oh, okay, that's where it is. So that's right. So next one I'm going to move on to then is Nurije. So Nurije sent us this one and says, I took this at Tintagel Castle in Cornwall a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, Maggie and I went down to Tintagel, many, possibly up to about 30 years ago, I think. We've not been together that long. We went on a camping trip, which took us down to Cornwall. And Tintagel Castle, you've got this bridge bit that you have to walk across to get to this kind of raised part. It's quite spectacular. If you ever get the chance, worth going to. So I had to wait for quite a while for people to get across the bridge so that I could lay down on the ground and take this shot and get the shadow. And I think, yeah, that's certainly a part of the fun of this shot as well is first of all, we've got that perspective shot like we had with Robert's Road, the first photo we looked at. So the eye gets drawing us along, but also I think that the texture, we've got the texture of the bridge, but this shadow is rather nice too. And, you know, a bit like Graham's bee, you managed to catch a seagull, I think, in the shot as well. So far, but a little bit like Robert's one here as well, I think you could tilt it just fractionally counterclockwise a degree or two. Now, this might not have been exactly flat. You see, what's happening here is you've got a very flat horizon line in the foreground here, and it looks like that's what you've kind of measured it to. But if we look at the houses up here, it's very slightly tilted. The houses look slightly tilted off, and that's really what we're going to notice on. Although it's even more tilted on the bridge. If you straightened the far horizon here and made that straight, I think what would happen is the houses would then tilt slightly the other way, and that would look wrong. We know a house will be absolutely upright, so the fact that we can see a house means that's where we're going to judge whether something's tilted or not. And I think half a degree to maybe 1 degree counterclockwise tilt on this would just kind of straighten it up a little bit. But other than that, Nurije, yeah, fun photo. Great, that idea of having the leading light, that perspective lines taking us down into the and yeah, nice to kind of catch the shadows. And I can imagine that sense of just as you're about to take another photo, somebody else comes and walks on the bridge and you've got to wait again. So extra smug points to you there for your patience, I think. Right. Meg saying thank you to everyone for the kind words. Susan says, great leading line of shadow in the centre. Stacey says, I love the leading lines, nice perspective. April says, shadow is nice. Sandra also says, I like the shadow in the leading line. Nurije says she agrees. I guess that's probably with the straightening. Rosemary says textures and shadows are very interesting, Nurije. And Nurije says thank you for the smug point, much appreciated. Yes, well, I think anybody who's put something in absolutely get a smug point. So where are we now? Oh, next up. Yes, next up's quite interesting. Now, this is from Viji. Now, Viji didn't send one, she sent 3. I know I normally say 1, but she has a reason for it. So Viji says, my submission for ground level photography challenge. There are 3 different photos and it has to be seen in whole to understand the concept. Hence, I wasn't able to submit just the 1. The photos were taken during my stay at a nearby hill station. I had with me my camera, my flip-flops, a beautiful lawn and some colourful marigolds as a backdrop, and I rested my camera at ground level. So, and this is what she took. So, certainly a bit of fun here, placing the glasses on the flip-flops, beautiful golden marigolds in the background, on the lawn. So it's that kind of playing around, we're making faces, and the fact that one of them has glasses, even though the other one doesn't, automatically makes them feel like a couple. So this is photo number 1. But Viji, so she's done 2 more, but Viji goes on, says, as we grow old, some grow old with their loved ones. And then she took a second one here, which is where one of the flip-flops is turned away. She says, a few go their own ways, and then some live alone. So each one has a story to tell and lead their lives content, happy, longing, or sad. The journey, however, is always memorable with its sweet, sour, spicy moments. I thought this was apt for the challenge. So a lot of, interesting. I like the idea of it creating a story. I mean, a story as simple as placing a pair of glasses on a pair of flip-flops, and we automatically can't help but anthropomorphise. We see faces. We've got a whole chunk of our frontal lobe dedicated to noticing faces. So we will see them everywhere. So that idea, essentially what we've got is a triptych idea. We've got 3 different photos, all based around the same, with each one slightly different, each one with telling a different aspect of a story. So smug points for you there, Viji, for that. Now, in terms of what I would say is that if you are going to do a triptych kind of story like this, ideally the best thing to do is to try and make each of the photos the same crop, sort of composition and depth of field. So that then what happens, see, with each of these, this one's a very landscape crop, this one's a sort of somewhere in between, this one's a square crop. This one you can see the marigolds in the background, as you can with this one, but you can't with this one. This one's got this one is a sort of narrower depth of field, or you've blurred the background a bit more. This one, these two, the background are more in focus. So the thing is with these is each of the photos that you've taken, Viji, have a different setup, a different depth of focus, a different composition. And I think really the power, if you're trying to do a kind of triptych idea of this, so you're taking your story and saying the idea of we go through life with people, we can be with people for a while and then somebody takes a different path, or we can end up on our own. So as a storytelling idea, it's a fun idea, but I think it will become massively accentuated if each of the photos matches all the other conditions. So you make sure the crop is the same, you make sure the depth of focus is the same, you make sure the background is the same, and then what you do is you allow the 2 flip-flops to be together, the flip-flop face the other way, and then the flip-flop on its own, all essentially at the same ratio, and all other conditions being the same. So the only thing that's different from photo to photo is the flip-flop, and nothing else all else in the photo is the same. And I think if you do that, then you amplify the power of the story massively. So smug points there for the story and for playing around with it. In terms of the lesson, if you like, if you're going to get another go at trying to do something like this, think about that idea of just making sure everything else in the photo stays the same. The only thing that changes is your subject. And I think you will find that it becomes a much more powerful thing. And then what you can even do, depending on you can even stick them together into one strip on a photo to make it look like a sort of trip. If you think how it would be printed, that you would maybe have the three of them next to each other. So, fun idea there, Viji. Thanks for sending that one in. Comments here. Where are we? April says you're a riot, Viji. Stacey says fun shot. April says love it. Cheryl says fun concept. Stacey says good to show and creative. Viji says clever idea. Rosemary says clever idea. Viji. Susan says lovely story. Viji. Sandra says I like the idea of putting glasses on the flip chops. Meg says absolutely brilliant photo. Nicola says very unusual concept. Viji. And Nurije says nice one. Viji. Excellent. Okay, let's move on then. So Don, I got a message from Don this morning saying he suddenly got called away and couldn't turn up for the, but he will come and watch the follow-up. But I really like Don's photo. Now, actually, what I will do is to flip back to Rosemary earlier when you're talking about kind of doing these macro shots down level. Where I think it works particularly well, let me show you Don's photo here with the daisies. And this is a great example, I think, of getting down at ground level. This is working. This works on several levels that we've talked about before. So we've got the sharpness of the daisy, got the bouquet in the background, but the background is also creating an echo. Or we can see all these other daisies. Even the one, they might not be fully in focus, but they're recognisable enough. So that also gives us our colour palette. Looks like blue sky, whether it's blue sky or blue shed, I don't know, but it's kind of got that sky. So we've got a colour palette of the yellow and white with the bits of green and the pale blue. This daisy is in fact, I was kind of thinking, was it Sandra last week or the week before sent in a couple of pictures where you were talking about where we were looking at flowers and the problem of kind of creating separation from a busy background. So this in a way is kind of an answer to that one, Sandra. Is you can see that first, that we have this daisy here is also physically separate from even though there's one here, one down here, which are kind of along a similar focal plane, so still sharp. This is separate enough, and then we've got all the echoes of the other one. So he's gone for a narrow depth of field. Now, in terms of, to Rosemary, where is this focused? This one is focused actually just into the centre. It's not the very centre of the seed head, but just in the front of it. But you notice how it goes out of focus on the petals behind, out of focus on the petals in front. The petals to the side here, that just there on the same focal plane adds a nice little bit of sharpness. But if the focus had just been on these front petals, it wouldn't have worked quite as well. So the only thing I would say with this is this feels very central. I would maybe want to sort of pull down the top a little bit. It's a difficult one to balance perfectly, but other than the crop, which I might play around with a little bit more, I think the rest of this works really well. So smug points to you there, Don. A good ground level photo, that one I think, of the daisies. Right, where are we? Cheryl says, I really love this one. April says, beautiful daisies. Viji says, oh, you're right, great input. I'm glad that's useful. Marilyn says, lovely. Susan says, love the daisies. Sandra says, beautiful, exactly the look I'm after when photographing a group of flowers. Viji says, white and pure, lovely daisies. Rosemary says, yes, I like how the main daisy is focused so beautifully. Viji says, I actually like the blurred daisies in the background as well. Yes, the blurred daisies are kind of really adding to the texture of the overall picture and creating echoes. I think that notion of echoes, I'm sure I've talked before about it in photography, it's a useful kind of concept which can add an extra level. And we talked earlier about the idea that if it's too busy that you can maybe place a card. You could place a card behind a daisy and just isolate the daisy in the way that maybe John might have been able to isolate his mushroom, but in this case actually having these echoes of the other flowers in the background really enhances that photo, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on. So we're going to move on to Sandra. And Sandra said this time, here's a photo of some cyclamen in my back garden. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it, but it really quite beautiful photo, beautiful flowers, or beautiful pink against this kind of dark bluey green of the leaves, quite thick. It does feel a little bit dark. I don't know whether you could have maybe taken the levels up a touch more, although it's got that kind of sort of evening feel, like sort of after the sun's gone down, so a slightly more kind of muted approach to it, but lovely kind of burst of pink there. But yeah, this is again a good kind of ground level. You're getting down to the ground level, looking across. It's also interesting how sort of some of the petals here, this kind of coming off. And so it's part of it here where you've got the two, but I almost wonder whether it could almost work if you kind of cropped in for the one in this. While you have the two, there's quite a large sort of a gap between them, and I think, or if they were a little bit closer, or if perhaps if you'd moved around to your left, maybe, I don't know, 30 degrees, something like that, then what you might have found is that, and then had focus on the first one, the second one would be to one side, there wouldn't be as much gap to it, but it would then be out of focus and would actually create that echoing as well. So another thought of ways you could play with that. Always whenever you're taking photos of the flowers, if you've got more than one, change the angle. Always worth playing around with changing the angle to change the relationship between the two flowers that are there. But some points there for you, Sandra. Viji says, is that a water plant? April says, a dark and moody flower shot. Nice. Stacey already said, I love the pattern of the Shasta daisies against a beautiful backdrop. Right, next up then we have Susan. Susan's also been at the dandelions, but this time she's gone for the dandelion clock. Although there we've got beautiful kind of, looks like another dandelion in the foreground here. And Susan goes on to say, I've attached an image for your ground level photo challenge. Challenge is indeed the right word. This really made me think outside my box. That's excellent. I'm glad it did, Susan, and I'm really glad you decided to go for it. I was taking my daily walk on Kakubri Golf Course. I took 160 images, finally deciding on this. 158 were rubbish. Oh, well, that's familiar to everybody who takes photos. I mean, we joke quite often. Robert's often joking about the number of photos he's taken for the one photo that he got. I think it is one of those things that we all have this. We all have this. We're chasing the photo and the hit rate feels terrible. We put up the one photo and everybody goes, lovely photo. And we go, yeah, but you didn't see the 150 other photos that didn't work. But nobody actually cares about the 150 other photos that didn't work. They only care about the one that did. So the fact that you got the one that did, smug points to you. Feel good about it. We all do this. We all take loads of photos. And I think it's brilliant because, I mean, how many times, I've said quite often, you know, that the photos you get right, that's great. You get the praise for the photo you get right. All the photos you get wrong are where you learn. The previous 150 photos, you were working your way towards it. Now, next time you do this, it won't take you as many as 150. But I think that idea of just, you're keeping at it. You're going for it. You're trying to find the way. You'll be playing around with your depth of focus. You'll be playing around with the shutter speed in your ISO. You're playing around with what's in the background, the angles, where the light's coming from. All of these until eventually you get the one that you feel comfortable with, the one that you feel is doing what you wanted it to. And I think that's the real mark of the photographer. I was going to say the fanatic photographer, but I would say the photographer, because if you are a photographer rather than just someone who takes photos, you are a fanatic about it. You're obsessed with it. If you weren't obsessed with it, you take the odd photo and just go, so what? Anybody who's regularly watching these podcasts is by their nature obsessed with it. If you weren't obsessed with photography, you wouldn't be able to stand these podcasts. Kudos to Maggie, who isn't obsessed with photography but is very, very supportive of me and will let me know if suddenly everything goes wrong. Extra smug points to Maggie for that, yes, for her support, I will say. So yeah, this is a fun one. And again, actually, interestingly, where you've done the point of focus. Now, I think with dandelions, this is one of those where, because they are sort of sort of translucent, you can focus in different points. And if you focus on the centre of the dandelion, you are on with a macro lens, it will be different than if the fact you focus on the front or the back. But in this case, I think focusing on the front here is certainly the best place. You don't need the stalk to be completely in focus. In this case, what happens, you're getting those lovely little seed heads nice and sharp in the foreground. And then it sort of, we can see by the time we get to the outer edges, it all gets a bit fluffy. And I think that's really kind of adding the texture and allowing the sharpness of the front part to really stand out against the soft background. And also, this narrow depth of field, we've got this just lovely line of sharp grasses with the blurry ones in front and the blurry ones behind. And I do love that little splash, that splash of yellow. In fact, I could almost want to kind of isolate that splash of yellow there. And, you know, there's something rather lovely about that as well. But that works really nicely to go with the dandelion clock there. So smug points to you there, Susan, for sure. Right, oh, where are we here? Close that and click over here. Oh, Sandra says that it's not sorry. What's Sandra saying? Oh, right, it's not a water plant. It is a bulb that grows in the ground. April says, nice shot. Peter says, nice use of depth of field. Sandra says, great dandelion shot. Nadia says, lovely dandelion photo. Rosemary says, beautiful texture. April says, the sun is starting to come out now, Stacey. A little behind Pennsylvania. Viji says, lovely dandelion, looks like a miniature tree. And Maggie says, I love that isolated yellow too. Thought you would, Maggie. So let's move on then to Nadia. So Nadia, and I do love this shot. I absolutely love this shot, I do have to say. Nadia said, I won't be getting much of a chance to get out this week with my camera, so here's one from my archive of the Forth Bridge. I think this is an excellent one. Super smug points to you here, Nadia, for this one. I think this is a really good example of a ground level shot. I mean, the Forth Bridge, which crosses in Scotland here, is a very powerful, impressive piece of engineering, Victorian engineering. Is it Victorian? I think so. Anyway, very powerful piece of engineering, a very distinctive bridge, one of the kind of globally famous ones. And shots from the side looking down the length of it aren't uncommon, but I like the way you've used black and white. The thing about the Forth Bridge is it's also painted red as well, so that's the way we're used to seeing it. Taking away the red actually just makes us look at the texture much more. But being at this ground level, the anchor, which is essentially like a statue in some ways, and the tub here, the bollards, and the broken up stonework, everything just gives us this sort of feeling of really being there, being kind of immersed in it and sort of surrounded by it. You really get this feeling of being at ground level. Nice textures in the sky as well. Your angle of the bridge just kind of drawing us in. So that diagonal, along with the diagonal of the anchor as well, adding a sort of dynamism and energy and movement to what is otherwise a static picture. So it works on a whole number of levels. It's a good conversion to black and white, great textures, great leading lines, and a good sense of that kind of if you consider what it would be like if you were standing up and took this same photo, and so that anchor was actually sitting, if you like, below the horizon line. This bridge mostly would still be sitting above the horizon line, but this anchor wouldn't. If you were standing up, it would be below the horizon line. Now maybe you would stand a little bit taller and even have that kind of not quite breaking the horizon so that it was standing out against the water level. But you can see how much of a different kind of photo it would be. So again, that's one of those things where it's worth experimenting. But you can see by being down at ground level, you get this wonderful shape breaking above the horizon, which then changes your whole dynamic of the picture and your whole dynamic of what's there. So yeah, smug points to you there, Nadia. It's a good one. Thank you for sending that one in. Comments here. Susan says, thanks for all the lovely comments. It was worth the wet knees and elbows. Sandra says, great shot, Nadia. Cheryl says, this works so well in monochrome, fab shot. Viji says, whoa, Nadia, what a shot. Stacey says, April, glad the sunshine came out. We need the rain. April says, love this one in black and white. And Nicola says, lots of interesting things going on in this image that all work really well together. Well done, Nadia. Right, okay, so on to our final photo, and then I'll tell you about next week. Oh, Nadia's saying thank you to everyone for their lovely comments. And Viji says, solid iron always gives that solid look, and every bit is impressive. Right, so on to the final image. Sorry, no, not that one. Right, on to the final image to show up is this one from Cheryl. So I will have to say that in the Facebook page when Cheryl put this one got more comments and feedback than any other photo this week. So super smug points to you here for this one, Cheryl. It is a fun one. I thought I would leave it to the end here because it just really does kind of grab the attention. Cheryl says, here's my entry for the lowdown challenge. This was taken last month when the frogs were spawning in my pond. It's normally a mass orgy of bodies all over the place, so I was rather pleased and fortunate to get this shot with the frogs all in a row looking pretty much all looking in the same direction. I was lying on the wet ground and got soaked in the process, but pleased with the results. And it is. I think there's the sense of texture, light. It's not just the frogs themselves. You've edited this. You've edited it well. The way you've kind of vignetted around to darken out any distracting parts in the background and foreground, draw our attention to the frogs here. I think it's very well edited as well, and the way you've cropped it, framed by the leaves on either side. All these eyes kind of standing out, but at the same time, the kind of I don't know if that's frog spawn or whether it's other bits of bubbles or bits, but the kind of echoes, if you like, in the textures on the water, with the kind of roundness and wetness of the eyes and as well. It's an absorbing shot, something you kind of keep looking at. Or if you really aren't into frogs, they look so alien, probably kind of a bit, whoa, take it away from me. But for me, I think it's great. And again, back to that thing of the idea, I think the commitment of the photographer. I mean, we've had a couple of comments here about wet knees and elbows and earfuls of moss, and certainly to get down to this level, to get wet in pursuit of the photo that you're after. And I think it's that thing that a lot of non-photographers don't really understand, is how far the photographer is prepared to go in order to get the shot. And for some people that can be sitting in a hide for 6 hours. For some people it can mean trekking up mountains pre-dawn in order to get the sunrise. For some people it can mean organising large groups of people together and arranging them, finding models and outfitters and hairdressers and everything. So there's, it's how far are you prepared to go to get the shot. And if you are prepared to go further than most people, you've got more chance of actually ending up with a kind of shot that other people just can't get. So, smug points to you there, Cheryl. Thanks very much for sending that one in. Comments here. Where have we got? Oh, yeah. So Robert says, great frog shot. April says, the frogs are great. Who does not like frogs? Well, actually, I do know people who don't like frogs, but Susan says, love how you've got the separation of the 4 items on the dock side. Nadia. Nadia says, absolutely lovely image. Sandra says, great frog shot. Stacey says, love the frogs. April says, the frogs probably thought, what is wrong with this human? Peter says, great photo. Rosemary says, Cheryl, this is so amazing. Well worth getting wet. Great subject, perfect timing, excellent technical, super smug points. John says, great photo of the frogs, well done. Nicola says, 1 in a million shot, frogging perfect. Stacey says, lucky they didn't disappear. Frogs sometimes hop away depending on how close. Viji goes, those eyes. And Meg says, really, really good photo. It is absolutely fantastic. So, thank you to all 19 of you who sent in images. Cheryl says, thanks very much for the kind comments. Glad you liked it. So, smug points to everybody who sent in the images. I think it's been a really great great selection there. And like I say, for those of you who've not tried doing ground level photography, I hope it inspires you to really go out and try. And for those of you who've had a go, I hope you've learnt enough to actually want to go and do it again. I think it's certainly an interesting one to have in your toolbox. And for those of you who really want to get down but struggle with the idea of getting down because you might not get back up again, there is the notion of, we talked last week about the fact if you've got a tripod or a monopod, you can attach your camera and then turn it upside down and lower it, and then use your flip screen so you can kind of see what's going on. That's certainly one of the ways you can do it. Another thing is that even if you can't get to ground level, is the idea to actually go onto a wall or a fence, or even like an outside table can be quite interesting. The whole idea is sort of to be at the surface rather than above it and see what kind of things you see, because we very rarely are ever at that surface. So this gives us a chance to see things we wouldn't otherwise. Right, so next week we will be it's going to be a critique, a feedback session. So if you want to make sure you get feedback on your photos, make sure you send them in to me. Tell me a little bit about the photo, tell me what your sticking point is, where the problem is, or if you have any interesting questions, let me know about what kind of questions on photography as well. So if you either email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk, or put the images in the Facebook group. There's a Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Just type that into Facebook, you'll find it. Join it if you haven't done already. Put your pictures in there and let me know what kind of feedback you would like on your photos, and I will do my best to help. If you have any ideas for future programs or episodes, then let me know that as well. So yeah, okay, that's everybody charging away, saying goodbye everyone. Final reminder that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, or entertaining, then do support them. Subscribe, like the video as well, tell your friends, and if you really feel up for it, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Meanwhile, look forward to seeing you all next week, and make sure you get your photos in. Ideally earlier in the week. The earlier in the week, I tend to do them pretty much on a first come first served basis. So if you're wanting feedback on your photo, the sooner you get it in, the more chance I'll be able to help you. Right, okay, and where are we? We're doing that, doing that, and I'll press this one. Thanks very much to everybody. See you all next week.